chased through an orange grove. I grew up in a small Southern California town known for its orange groves from days gone by. All those groves have been replaced by housing developments and shopping centers now, but there were still quite a few around when I was growing up in the 90s. My friend Johnny and I used to get into all kinds of trouble back then. We were just general miscreants. But there was one time I truly believe we almost became victims of a kidnapper. If anyone reading this also grew up in the 90s, you know that it was a different era. We'd be out all times of the day, and our parents would have no idea where we were. There were lots of kidnappings back then. I can remember multiple times that I was offered candy or asked by some creep to help him find his cat. I always said I'd go check with my mom, and by the time she'd get outside ready to whoop some, but he'd be gone. So anyway, Johnny and I were up to no good one day after school. We were traipsing around this orange grove that bordered his street. We started pulling these little metal dam things off the irrigation channels and tossing them wantonly. All of a sudden we heard a sharp whistle and both looked up to see this man about 25 feet away from us wagging his finger and going But his reaction was not at all proportional to the property damage we were causing. He clearly didn't own or work in the grove, because instead of screaming at us to stop, he had a grin from ear to ear. I can still see his face in my mind all these years later, and it gives me chills. Johnny and I stood there for a second watching this guy, then we looked at each other and Johnny looked back toward the guy and shouted, "Run." I look over and the guy is in an all-out sprint toward us. Despite the physical exertion he was putting into his sprint, the grin was still there. Johnny and I ran harder and faster than we ever had before. We made it out of the grove and back to his house before noticing the guy wasn't behind us anymore. We quickly forgot about it because Johnny's family had just gotten a Nintendo 64 and we started playing Mario. I can't remember if it was the next day or week, but sometime after this happened we were with his mom getting donuts and we saw a wanted poster with a sketch of a man that looked awfully similar to the guy who chased us. He was wanted for trying to kidnap a boy outside of a school. Johnny and I looked at each other and seemingly telepathically agreed to never say a word. I don't know why we never spoke up. But we never did speak of it again. As I'm typing this, I'm considering reaching out to him to see if he remembers and if it aligns with my memory of the incident. There were so many different things that happened in my childhood in the 90s that could have easily ended with me dead. Somehow I'm still here and I have my own family now. I trust no one because of incidents like that. I always have my head on a swivel. Dude that chased me and Johnny in that orange grove that day, let's not meet. A man knocked on the window. I was leaning on at 3 a.m. This happened when I was 12 years old. I'm currently 24. My family moved from the city into a quiet suburb near stables and farms. To set the scene, during our first summer there down the road on some farmland, a body had been found, presumably gang-related. The neighborhood has large spaced-out houses, is dark, and is mostly older retired people or families. It wasn't uncommon for cars to be stolen or broken into either, as it happened to my grandmother a couple of times during the first few years they moved there. After that, they installed cameras and floodlights both in the back and front yard. At the time of the incident, no such lights existed. On to my creepy encounter. We had just moved into this large house and I so happened to get the basement room that has a glass sliding door to the backyard. As I'd never had a room with a glass sliding door, and it was quite literally the month we moved. I had my mattress on the floor pushed up against the glass sliding door with no curtains or bed frame. The iPhone 4 was all the rage at the time and I was glued to mine 24/7. I was up at 3 a.m. in my room probably playing Temple Run or on Instagram. My aunt, who was in active addiction at the time, was attempting recovery and was on the wait list for treatment. She was staying with us briefly. She was doing laundry late at this time, which is located right outside my room. She's sorting through her items, some of which are in the backyard waiting to be washed. She asked me if I could come out with her while she had a cigarette and to go through some of her packed items in the backyard. As I was the only other person awake, I agreed and we sat outside on the ground, huddled around a couple of candles she lit. After a few minutes, I became uneasy and asked to go back inside. She agreed and we went back to what we were doing before. I had my back pressed against my room's glass sliding door, just chilling for a couple minutes until I heard and felt a few small rapid knocks on the glass door. Some man whispered, "Hey. Hey." I froze for what felt like forever. I then dropped my iPhone and booked it into the laundry room to get my aunt. The light in my room made it impossible to see outside. It became a black mirror where only our reflections were seen. We double-checked that every window and door was locked and eventually fell asleep in my younger sister's room upstairs. It took me a long time to sleep though. We never found out who it was. I did tell my family, but they never really took me seriously as my auntie was always paranoid, and I assumed they thought I was lying or overreacting. It couldn't have been anyone we knew as we had just moved there only a couple of weeks before. If it had been any other family, they simply would have called or at least used the front door, as everyone in my family knows I have always startled and scared easily. My auntie is also protective over my grandma as she's always been her safe space, so she would never give anybody any personal information, like our address. The person who lived there before us too was a very, very old lady. My only guess is it was someone looking to get into trouble. All I can say for sure is I'm glad I never found out why. It haunts me to this day that the only thing that separated me from him was glass, and that he was probably watching us when we were outside in the dark backyard area. Since then, I always make sure every door and window is locked and outside lights stay on at night. Not a face-to-face meet, but only because my door was locked. I've been watching a bunch of scary YouTube stuff recently, and it reminded me of something that happened last year. Didn't know where to put it though since it's real, but I got directed to this subreddit, so hi all. At about 10 p.m. someone was knocking on every door in my apartment building. Like every single door, pulling on the handle too. While writing this I did wonder if someone was just needing help. Say someone they were hanging out with had an accident or something. But they were also super quiet. I never heard a word the whole time I was listening to them go door to door. Plus, after they got through every door, it just stopped. I didn't get a full recording of it because I was too busy being scared and listening, sorry. I got a snippet if anyone's interested, but it's only a couple seconds. After looking through my emails, dates for security guards being brought in matches the week when this happened, so it could have been security, but again, why didn't they say so? Every other member of staff always states who they are and why they're here to get your attention in case you don't answer the door. Whoever this was actively trying to get into a room, jiggling the doorknob like that. Staff have spare keys if they're desperate to get in. Security didn't really stop people from getting into the apartment either. My video was recorded in mid-March, but the fire alarm was set off by some kids getting in during April. The mystery door knocker didn't sound like a group though. That was a singular weirdo. Maybe one member of the group of kids got dared to do it, I dunno. And I never want to find out LMAO. Though looking back, I do sort of wish I looked through the peephole, just curious. Long story short, my apartment security sucks. I've tried to provide proof, but it does sound kinda like a silly story, especially the long seconds of knocking that could very well have been someone I just asked. But that could be because I'm consuming a bunch of that style of content right now. All I can do is give you my word and the fact that almost all student apartments are but.